All right, so welcome back to Pyrus Gaming. So I actually went out and competed in multiple tournaments and I learned quite a bit from my experiences. So today we're going to talk about my experiences, my first few tournaments that I went to in person, and I've got some tips for you guys for when you go out there and take part in some of these tournaments. So to kick it off, we'll talk about the tournaments that I actually joined. The first tournament I competed in, it was in basically the basement of a restaurant, but it was like a furnished basement. It wasn't like we were in some kind of dungeon or something. I misread what time I was supposed to be there, so by the time I showed up, they were still not ready to go. Cool part was I got to sit down at one of the setups as they were building everything up, and they set up a whole bunch of different setups across the room where you could do free play, and then some were set aside for tournament, and then there were additional ones that were set aside either, you know, Xbox or PCs that were running other games or modded games, those types of things. So overall it was a pretty cool experience. Now in the actual tournament itself, I ended up going 2-2. So I won my very first match. My first match was against a player who was really nice. It actually ended up being my only match that was on stream, as they do stream the local matches from the tournament. I did win that match and I won it pretty convincingly. I was able to move on to the second round. The second round I ran into a player named Kite, who is actually one of the best local players. Now, at the time I didn't know this, and so I just figured, hey, I'm playing the second guy. It was kind of funny because we actually both used the same controller, which is the Victrix Pro BFG, although he uses it in a 4-button setup and I use mine with the 6 buttons. And I was actually able to take one game off of Kite, which at the time I was kind of upset because I figured, man, it's only the second round. I already got knocked to loser's bracket, and I felt like Kite was significantly better than me, but I just figured that I would be able to go a little further than that before taking my first loss. So went into the loser's bracket, went up against another player who was better than the first one I played. Again, really nice guy. He had some controller issues. He was playing on Xbox controller for some reason, and he ended up swapping it out for another Xbox controller. Everything was being played on PlayStation, so I'm not sure why he's using Xbox controllers, maybe for the D-pad. But anyway, nice guy. It was close. He won one game, I won 2-1. My fourth match was against another player who was a DeeJay player, and I ended up getting knocked out of the tournament by him, and he actually seemed like a bit of a sandbagger. He told me, oh, I don't play ranked, I just play for fun, and oh, you play this game a lot, and those types of things, and we'll revisit him in a few minutes. But long story short, he ended up beating me. I got out to a quick lead in the first round, and then I don't know if he picked up on something I was doing or what the deal was, but I really struggled after that, and he ended up winning 2-1, knocking me out of the tournament. The first player that I mentioned, Kite, who beat me, ended up winning the whole tournament. And that got me kind of thinking. As we got to the later rounds, he kept winning. He was on winner's side, win, 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 win. He gets into the grand finals. I ended up talking to him for a couple of minutes, and he said that I was the only player that before grand finals had gotten a game off of him. And I said, oh, wow, really? I didn't realize that. And then I said, well, what rank are you anyway? And he said, I'm master. At the time, I was platinum 4. And I said, you're a master? He's like, yeah. And I said, wow, you actually just made my day. Because again, when I first lost to him, I don't know who any of these people are. It's the first tournament I ever went to. And I figured that, you know, getting a loss that early was just me not being very good. But it turned out I actually did take a game off of a master in tournament. Turned out to be one of the best local players. Maybe I got lucky, I don't know. Because after doing some research, I found that he does well in like pretty much every tournament he enters. Overall, it was a great experience. Local group, plenty of free play setups around. So if you wanted to practice against people or challenge people, you didn't get locked out just because you were not playing your tournament game or because you were knocked out of the tournament. That was a great experience overall. It was fun. There were a few things that obviously aren't like, you know, going to a major tournament, and there are some things that will be a little bit, shall we say, more local kind of feeling. But honestly, it was a great experience. I'm definitely looking to enter a similar tournament in the future. A few weeks later, I entered my second tournament, and this one was actually at Retro Game World, which is a retro video game expo that was held in one of the convention centers here in the state. And I played in that one, and I actually won my first match, but it was because of a disqualification. The other player didn't show up. My second match was against a Dhalsim player named Lucky D, and he was so much harder than any other Dhalsim I had ever played. And the main reason he was so hard was because he didn't jump up in the air and float all over the place like most Dhalsims do. He would float, but he would only float just barely above head level. So basically just high enough that if you throw fireballs, it's not going to hit him. But if you try to drive rush in or something, he can use like a heavy punch or something like that and hit you. And this made it incredibly difficult for me. He was either floating right there, or he was on the ground and he was pressing buttons and he was slapping me in the face as I tried to come at him. And that was a brutal, brutal match for me. So technically I was 1-1 at that point because I got the disqualification. Then I lost to Lucky D. Then I went up against a Zangief player in the next round. And again, super solid player. I was thinking to myself, oh great, Zangief, that's much better than Dhalsim. And while I did have some opportunities in that match, I did win a round or two. Again, I could not beat him. He played much better on the ground. He was super solid. He would corner me. I'd get in trouble. I'd make a mistake and he'd punish me for it. And at that point, it was 2 rounds of actual playing, the disqualification round. So technically I got through 3. I was 1-2, and I was out of that tournament as well. Funny enough, Kite was at that one, and he actually got second place in that tournament too. So that was 2 tournaments I entered. Kite was winner and second place in the 2 tournaments. So at that point, I wasn't feeling so great about how I performed in the tournaments. Luckily, it was an expo for retro video games, so I actually did a lot of other stuff. I went around. Basically, I did some retro game hunting, and I was able to do some other things while the tournament was going on after I was knocked out. There did open up some setups for free play afterward, but it definitely wasn't as easy access as it was in the prior local tournament. Then I was considering going to East Coast Throwdown, and if you know what East Coast Throwdown is, it is a huge tournament that is held in Stamford, Connecticut. The thing that ended up stopping me from going to that was that it was a big investment. I mean, I think it was around $100 by the time I would have been registering, and it was a 3-day event. It's not like I could take all that time off from work and get down there and spend 3 days. And what if I go down there day 1, I get knocked out? What am I gonna do? Keep coming back to watch everyone else play for the next 2 days? They had other stuff in that event I could have gone and seen and all that, and it would have been fun for a day, but for 3, when I know the type of competition that's out there just from the last couple of tournaments I played in, I made the decision not to do it because it was expensive, it was a lot of time, it was a big investment, and I just didn't have the time to do all of that. I did end up watching it on Twitch, and it was actually a great event, and there were definitely some amazing players that were there, and it would be fun to spectate, but I'm definitely not at that level yet, and I think it would have been, unfortunately, a waste for me to go and pay to enter those tournaments and spend all that time. Next year I may go just for the experience of being at the event, or maybe I'll just try to see what I could do as far as going for a single day on the final day. At the end of the day, I was happy that I didn't enter that, even though it would have been cool, but I don't think I was on the level with the folks that ended up playing there anyway. After those 2 offline events, I will say that I did feel a little down in the dumps. I did know that Kite was a master player, but the other players, I wasn't sure why I lost to all of them. For a little while, I was thinking, man, you know, this stuff, maybe I'm just not at the level for this. Then I did take a minute to actually go back and look up those players I played against to see what their ranks were. And lo and behold, they were obviously master for Kite, master for Lucky D. The DeeJay I played against was Diamond 4 or Diamond 5, and the Zangief I played against was Diamond 4 or Diamond 5. So every single one of them was ranked much higher than me in ranked at the time that I played them. And at that point, I decided to myself, you know what? I lost those games, but I was competitive. I actually was able to play with them. Maybe I didn't win those matches, but it made me feel better about it. So if you do end up going to a tournament, I would suggest maybe doing that. Just don't do it before you play the person. Do it afterwards. Assume everyone's great. Assume you have to be careful and that you have to play your top game. Play them, and then you can kind of see where you stand. So for my tips for going to these tournaments, My first tip is pick something that's pretty local, that's easy to get to, and that isn't a big commitment for you to go to, especially for your first tournament. I would say that that very first tournament that I went to, because of how local it was, I think the entry fee was like $10. It was super cheap. It was in a restaurant. I was able to get food. They had plenty of other setups for free play. It was fantastic. In fact, I'm definitely going to try to do something like that again. Maybe I'll try to con my brother into going with me. But it was super fun. I would definitely recommend something like that. I would suggest trying to find tournaments that have what are known as free play options, meaning setups that are going to be around, that you can play against other people that are not part of the tournament. Because as the tournament whittles down and down and down, if you're knocked out, particularly early, you don't want to be sitting there doing nothing. If it's just strictly a fighting game tournament and nothing else that's going to be able to take up your attention and your time and be worth seeing other than the tournament, and you're not super invested in watching every single match, then having those free play setups around and being able to play people and have fun and play the game is absolutely something that should be at the top of your priority list. The next thing is pay attention to how the tournament is set up in terms of the system you're playing on. Unfortunately, with PlayStation 5, if a tournament is set to play on PlayStation 5 on the PlayStation 5 version and your controller is not compatible with PlayStation 5, which includes a DualShock for PlayStation 4, then that can be a real problem. Now, the tournaments that I went to, there were Brooks converters around, and they had PlayStation 4 copies of those games running on those systems, so there wasn't really any major issue. Plus, the controller that I used, the Victrix Pro BFG, is compatible with PS5. The Hori Fight Commander Octa is also compatible with PS5, so neither one of them would have been an issue. But check it out, especially if you're using like a leverless controller or traditional fight stick. It's going to be critical that you make sure that your compatibility is not an issue with however that tournament is set up. Other than that, I would just think about what your options are as far as meals before, during, or after. Is there anything at the venue? Food, beverage, that type of thing. Get that kind of figured out just as if you're gonna do any other kind of trip. And lastly, just be the mindset to go there and have fun and play a video game. If you get too worked up over it, especially your first one, I mean, you're probably not gonna go in there and win the tournament right away. Maybe you will, maybe you're an amazing player, but just go with the mindset that you're playing with house money, you're going to a place to play video games with other people who all love the same video game, have fun playing with other players and being competitive and getting the competitive juices flowing, and don't put too much stress or pressure on yourself to perform or expectations too high on what's going to happen. Like I said, I ended up running into 2 Masters and 2 High Diamond players as a Platinum 4 player. That was not exactly the fairest of fights if you're just taking into consideration experience and rank. All right, so that's gonna do it for today. Hope you enjoyed these tips. Hope you learned a little bit from my experiences going to these tournaments. So as always, this is Pirates for Pirates Gaming saying thank you for watching, and until next time, I will see you there. I never show the back of this shirt. I think it's the best part of the shirt. Yeah, buddy.